The 5 screens in front of me showed 5 different faces, and every single one of them was smiling. I sat alone in the command chair of the prodigal son, lights dimmed low, watching the broadcast that every human colony, every listening post, and every drifting refugee ship was being forced to receive right now. My hands were steady on the armrests. My heart was not as steady as my hands. Captain Vorak of the Zhrala Concordat leaned toward his camera, his 4 eyes catching the light of his own bridge, and he raised a metal cup toward the lens like he was toasting an old friend. "People of Earth," he said, in a voice our translators rendered flat and mocking, "your fleet is gone. Your commanders are gone. We watched your ships burn at what you called Kepler's Veil, and we watched your survivors scatter like dust in solar wind. There is no one left to stop us." Behind him, 4 other captains stood in a loose half-circle, each one from a different ship, each one linked into the same broadcast, to make sure every human being watching understood the size of what they believed they had done. Captain Dessa of the 2nd warship laughed, a short clicking sound that our systems translated as pure amusement. Captain Horan, the oldest of them, simply nodded, arms crossed, like a teacher watching a lesson finally sink in. "We have taken your colonies at Meridian and Halcyon," Vorak continued. "We have taken New Arden. Soon we will take Earth itself, and there will be nothing left to call human civilization, except a name in old records. You built starships. You built weapons. In the end, you built nothing but a grave for yourselves." I did not move. I did not blink. 2 decks below me, I knew my crew was watching this same broadcast on their own stations, jaws tight, fists clenched, waiting for me to say something, to give an order, to do anything at all. I said nothing. Not yet. Captain Tellin, the youngest of the 5, stepped forward on his screen, eager the way young officers always are, when they think the hard part is already finished. "Send your surrender," he said. "Save what is left of your people. There is no fleet coming to save you. There is no one coming at all." The broadcast held on his face for 3 long seconds before it cut to a wide shot of all 5 ships together, hanging in open space above what used to be a peaceful human shipping lane, their hulls catching starlight, arranged in a loose formation that was more about performance than tactics. They wanted every camera drone, every civilian ship, every listening ear in this sector to see them standing there like conquerors. They wanted the galaxy to remember this moment, as the day Earth stopped being a threat to anyone. I let the recording finish. I let the silence afterward stretch out across my bridge until it felt like its own kind of pressure. Then I reached forward and tapped the comm control myself, because some orders should not come through a subordinate. "All hands," I said, my voice carrying to every deck of the Prodigal Son, and, through relay, to every hidden ship that had been waiting in silence for this exact broadcast to finish. "Hold position. Hold your breath if you have to. We are not done yet." Behind me, my 2nd officer, Daniel Ford, stepped up beside my chair. He had served with me for 6 years, through 2 wars and 1 betrayal that still had not fully healed, and I trusted his judgment more than I trusted most of my own instincts. "They believe it," he said quietly, watching the frozen image of the 5 captains, still hanging on the main display. "Every word of it. Command was right. They are not even scanning for us. They think there is nothing left to scan for." "That was the entire point," I said. I did not tell him what it had cost to make 5 alien captains believe humanity was finished. I did not need to. He had been there at Kepler's Veil too. He had watched the same ships die that I had watched die, had heard the same final transmissions crackle through static before they went silent forever. Some memories do not need to be spoken out loud between people who share them. They simply sit there, quiet and heavy, doing their work in the background of every following decision. On the display, Vorak's frozen face looked almost peaceful in his victory, 4 eyes half closed, cup still raised. I studied that face for a long moment, because I wanted to remember exactly how confident he looked right now, in this instant, before everything changed. "How long until the ceremony?" I asked. Daniel checked the readout, scrolling along the lower edge of the main screen, the one tracking alien fleet chatter that our intelligence teams had been quietly decoding for 3 weeks. "Their unity ceremony is scheduled in 6 hours. All 5 captains, all 5 ships, gathered in one place, broadcasting to every world in the Concordat, and every human settlement they can reach. They want the whole galaxy watching when they claim final victory over Earth. Then we let them have their ceremony, I said. We let them stand there and enjoy it. And then? I looked past him, toward the tactical display, where a series of quiet green markers sat scattered across the outer edge of the system, ships that had no business existing, according to every scrap of intelligence the Concordat believed it had gathered. Ships that had been built in silence, crewed in silence, and moved into position under the kind of stealth protocols that had never been tested in real combat before today. Then Earth answers them, I said, in person. Daniel did not smile, not exactly, but something in his posture eased for the first time since the broadcast had started playing. He had spent weeks helping me plan this moment, running simulations late into ship's night, arguing over every variable that could go wrong, and now here we were, 6 hours away from finding out whether all of that planning had been worth the cost. Across the bridge, our sensor officer, a sharp young woman named Grace Whitfield, kept her eyes fixed on her console, watching the alien fleet chatter scroll past in a language she had spent 2 years learning to read faster than she could read her own. She looked up at me once, briefly, and I saw something in her expression that I recognized instantly, because I felt the exact same thing sitting behind my own ribs. Fear, yes, but underneath the fear, something sharper. Something that had been building for months, ever since the first plans for this deception had been drawn up in a locked room, 3 systems away from any front line. Anticipation, the particular kind that comes right before a door opens on something that cannot be taken back once it starts. They are still broadcasting the celebration to their home fleets, Grace said. Recruitment feeds, propaganda channels. They are using this as proof that the war is over, that Earth was never a real threat to begin with. Let them use it, I said. Let every world in the Concordat watch this broadcast. Let every human colony watch it too, if that is what the enemy wants. We are not going to interrupt their victory speech. I stood from the command chair and walked toward the forward viewport, where the stars sat scattered in their usual silent patterns, indifferent to everything happening around them. Somewhere out there, hidden behind gas giants and tucked into the shadow of asteroid fields, the largest fleet humanity had ever assembled sat waiting for a single signal from this bridge. Every ship in that fleet had been built or refitted in secret. Every crew member had trained under strict silence, told almost nothing about the larger plan, except that patience mattered more than anything else they had ever been asked to give. 6 hours from now, that patience would either be rewarded, or it would be the last mistake humanity ever made. I thought about the colonies the aliens had named in their broadcast: Meridian, Halcyon, New Arden, real places with real people, some of whom I had known personally before the war reached them. I thought about the families who had been moved out in the weeks before those attacks, quietly evacuated under cover stories about routine maintenance and resource shortages, so that the aliens would find abandoned settlements and believe they had won something greater than they actually had. Not every family had gotten out in time. I carried that knowledge with me the same way I carried everything else from this war, folded up small and tucked somewhere I could access it later, when there was time to feel it properly. There was no time now. There would be no time for hours yet. Bring up the formation plan, I told Daniel. I want every ship commander to review their final positions one more time before we move. Already sent, he said. They have had it memorized for 2 days. You could wake any pilot on this fleet out of a dead sleep, and they could recite their exact coordinates without checking a screen. Good, I said, because in 6 hours, 5 captains who think they have already won this war are going to stand in front of their cameras and celebrate the death of a fleet that never actually died. Grace spoke up again from her station, her voice quieter now. Commander, may I ask something? Go ahead. Do you think they will believe us when we show up? Or do you think some part of them already suspects something is wrong? I considered the question honestly, because she deserved an honest answer, not a comforting one. I think confidence is the most dangerous weapon in any war, I said, and I think those 5 captains have more of it than any commander should ever be allowed to have. They believe the story we gave them, because it is the story they wanted to believe. Arrogance does most of the work in situations like this. We only had to build the stage. They walked onto it themselves. She nodded slowly, turning back to her console, and the bridge fell into a working quiet, the kind filled with the soft hum of machinery, and the occasional murmur of officers confirming readiness checks along different stations. I stayed by the viewport a while longer, watching the stars, thinking about the 6 hours ahead of us and the years of preparation that had led to this exact moment. 5 captains believed Earth was finished. 5 ships were about to broadcast that lie across the entire galaxy, as though it were an unshakable truth. They had no idea what was still out there, waiting in the dark, counting down the final hours before the truth arrived to introduce itself. 6 months before that broadcast, I stood on a different bridge, watching a different kind of silence settle over my crew, and that silence had nothing to do with patience. Kepler's veil was not supposed to be a defeat, it was supposed to look like one. The plan had come down from high command through channels so restricted that even I only received the full details 11 days before the operation began. A senior officer named Margaret Doyle, thin-faced and precise in every word she spoke, had walked me through it in a briefing room with the doors sealed and the recording systems disabled. "We cannot win a war of numbers against the Concordat," she told me. "Their fleet outnumbers ours nearly 4 to 1, and every month that gap grows wider. If we meet them ship for ship in open combat, we lose. Not eventually, soon." "Then what are we doing?" I asked her, "if not fighting?" "We are going to lose a battle on purpose," she said. "A battle large enough and convincing enough that every intelligence analyst in the Concordat believes our main fleet has been destroyed, and while they celebrate that victory, we are going to build a second fleet in complete secrecy, one they do not know exists, one large enough to end this war in a single strike." I remember sitting very still after she said that, running the numbers in my head, understanding immediately what kind of sacrifice a plan like that would require. You cannot fake a defeat of that size without losing real ships, real crews, real people who would need to believe, for the sake of the deception, that they were fighting an actual last stand, because any hesitation, any hint of performance in their actions, would be picked up by enemy sensors, and the entire plan would collapse before it began. "Who leads the decoy fleet?" I asked. "You do," she said, "because you are the only commander we trust enough to walk your people into that fire, and still bring the survivors home clean enough to build the second fleet afterward." I did not sleep that night, or for several nights after. I thought about every officer who would serve under me in that battle, every one of them trusting my orders completely, most of them with no idea that the fight we were about to enter had already been written as a loss before the first shot was fired. In the end, I told them the truth, not the full plan, not the details of the second fleet, but the truth about the battle itself. I gathered every ship commander who would serve under me at Kepler's Veil into a single briefing, and I told them plainly that we were about to fight a battle we were meant to lose, that some of us were not coming home from it, and that the price of that loss was a chance for humanity to survive the larger war. I expected anger. I expected some of them to refuse. Instead, I remember a young captain named Peter Hale standing up near the back of the room, his voice steady, despite everything I had just told him. "If it has to be someone," he said, "I would rather it be us, choosing it, than some other crew who never got the choice at all." Nobody else spoke after that. Nobody needed to. The battle itself began the way most battles begin, with sensor contacts appearing at the edge of a system, and warning klaxons cutting through the quiet of every bridge in our formation. The Concordat fleet arrived in greater numbers than even our intelligence had predicted, and for the first several hours it did not feel like a performance at all. It felt exactly like what it was supposed to look like from the outside, a desperate fight against overwhelming odds, except that every ship commander on our side understood something the enemy did not. We were not fighting to win. We were fighting to lose, in exactly the right way, at exactly the right pace, so that our retreat and our destruction would look completely real to every scanner watching from the other side. I gave the order that pulled our main formation into the kill zone we had mapped out weeks earlier, a stretch of space where damaged hull plating and drifting wreckage would be left behind in patterns that told a very specific story to anyone who came looking afterward. I watched ships under my command take damage that was real, because there was no way to fake damage convincingly enough without actually taking it. I listened to distress calls that were not staged, because the moment they became staged, an enemy sensor operator somewhere would notice the difference between a crew that was truly desperate and a crew that was performing desperation. Peter Hale's ship was one of the last to fall silent, I remember his final transmission clearly, because I have replayed it in my mind more times than I could count since that day. His voice was calm, almost gentle, the way people sometimes get when fear has already passed through them and settled into something quieter on the other side. "Tell them it worked," he said. "Whatever happens after this, tell them it worked." Then his channel went dark, along with 11 other ships that day, carrying crews whose names I have kept in a private file that I read through slowly, once a year, alone, where no one else can see me do it. We pulled our surviving ships back in a retreat that looked, to every enemy sensor watching, like the final collapse of Earth's main defense fleet. We left wreckage behind that told the story we needed told. We let our transponders go dark in a pattern that suggested total destruction rather than tactical withdrawal. Somewhere in the chaos of that retreat, small groups of specially prepared ships slipped away from the main formation entirely, running silent courses toward rendezvous points that no enemy scanner had any reason to search for, because as far as the Concordat was concerned, there was nothing left of Earth's fleet worth tracking anymore. I brought what remained of my formation home, through a series of jumps designed to look random, in case anyone was still watching, and it was not until we reached the final rendezvous point, deep behind the cover of a dead system, with no strategic value to anyone, that I finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of what we had just done. Margaret Doyle met me there in person, aboard a small transport that had clearly been waiting for our arrival. She looked at the casualty reports for a long time before she spoke. 11 ships, she said quietly. I am sorry. They knew what they were doing, I said, because it was the only thing I could say that felt honest and steady at the same time. They chose it. That does not make it easier to carry. No, I agreed. It does not. She handed me a datapad then, containing the first full briefing on the Second Fleet, the one that would be built in the months following our staged defeat, hidden behind every scrap of cover our engineers could construct. I read through the specifications slowly, feeling something shift inside my chest as the scale of the plan became clear. This was not a modest reserve force meant to hold a defensive line. This was meant to be the largest fleet humanity had ever built, constructed entirely in secret, crewed by volunteers who understood exactly what kind of silence would be required of them for the months ahead. "How long do we have?" I asked her. "As long as their arrogance holds," she said. "Every report our intelligence teams intercept tells us the same thing. The Concordat believes Earth's fleet is destroyed. They believe there is nothing left to watch for. That belief is the only head start we are going to get, and it will not last forever." I thought about Peter Hale's final words then, and about the 10 other crews who had gone dark alongside his ship, and I made a decision standing there on that quiet transport that I have never once regretted, even on the hardest nights since. "Then we do not waste it," I said. "We build something worthy of what it cost." Margaret nodded slowly, and for the first time since the briefing that had started all of this, I saw something close to hope cross her face. "There is one more thing," she said. "Command wants you leading the Second Fleet as well. Not as a reward, as a responsibility. You carried the cost of Kepler's veil. They believe you should be the one who carries the outcome too." I did not answer right away. I stood there thinking about 11 ships, and a retreat that looked like death from every angle an enemy sensor could measure, and about a young captain who had chosen, without hesitation, to walk into that fire, because someone had to and he preferred it be a choice, rather than an accident of fate. "I will do it," I said finally. "But I want the survivors from Kepler's veil given the choice to serve under me again, if they are willing. No one gets ordered into this a second time." "They already volunteered," Margaret said. "Every single one of them, before you even asked." That was the moment the Second Fleet truly began for me, not with a datapad full of ship specifications, but with the knowledge that the people who had already paid the first price of this plan were willing to stand beside me and pay whatever price came next, together, with open eyes and full understanding of exactly what we were building toward. 5 captains would eventually stand in front of their cameras and celebrate a victory built entirely on the sacrifice of 11 ships, and the crews who had chosen to fly them into a battle designed to be lost. They would never know the names of Peter Hale, or the 10 commanders who died alongside him. They would never understand that their entire victory rested on a foundation of choices made by people who believed, completely, that the cost was worth paying for whatever came after. I intended to make certain it was. The shipyard behind the third moon of a dead gas giant did not exist on any official record, and that was exactly the point. We built it in silence, piece by piece, over the course of 5 months, using construction crews who had been told only what they needed to know to complete their assigned section, and nothing more. Engineers worked on hull sections without ever seeing the full ship they belonged to. Weapons specialists calibrated targeting systems without knowing which vessel would eventually carry them into battle. Only a small circle of senior officers, myself included, ever saw the complete picture of what we were assembling in the shadow of that gas giant, far from any shipping lane the Concordat might think to monitor. I spent most of those months living aboard a command vessel called the Halyard, a ship that would later become part of the Second Fleet but that, in those early days, served mostly as my office, my quarters, and the place where I absorbed report after report about a construction effort unlike anything humanity had ever attempted. Daniel Ford served as my chief liaison between the shipyard and the crews training at 3 separate facilities, scattered across systems far enough apart that no single enemy patrol could ever hope to piece together what was happening between them. He came to me one morning, datapad in hand, with the kind of expression that told me before he even spoke that something was weighing on him. "We are behind schedule on the forward battery arrays," he said, "not by much. 11 days, maybe 12. But if the Concordat's confidence starts to slip earlier than we planned for, 11 days could matter." "Why are we behind?" "Supply lines," he said. "We cannot risk moving raw materials through normal channels without drawing attention, so everything is coming through smaller, disguised shipments, spread out across dozens of civilian-looking transports. It is slower than a direct supply chain would be, but it is also nearly impossible to detect." I studied the schedule for a long moment, weighing the risk of delay against the risk of exposure, and I understood, not for the first time, why Margaret Doyle had insisted this plan required patience above every other quality a commander could offer. "Keep the disguised shipments," I said. 11 days of delay is survivable. One intercepted supply run that reveals what we are building is not. Daniel nodded, made a note, and left to relay the decision, and I sat alone in my quarters afterward, thinking about how strange it was to command a war effort, built almost entirely out of waiting. Every instinct I had as a career officer pushed toward action, toward decisive strikes and clear objectives achieved quickly. This plan asked for the opposite. It asked me to sit still, month after month, while a lie did most of the actual fighting on our behalf. The training facilities were where I spent most of my time when I was not reviewing shipyard reports, because I believed strongly that a fleet was only as good as the people crewing it, and I wanted to know those people personally whenever possible. At the largest facility, hidden inside a converted asteroid mining colony that had been quietly repurposed years earlier, I met a flight instructor named Nathan Price, who had built an entire simulation program specifically designed to prepare pilots for the kind of coordinated strike we intended to launch once the Second Fleet was ready. He walked me through one of his training sessions personally, standing behind a row of simulator pods where young pilots practiced formation flying against increasingly difficult scenarios. "Most of them have never seen real combat," he told me, watching the readouts scroll past on a central monitor. "They know that. I know that. So we train them until the formation becomes instinct, something they do not have to think about, because in a real engagement, thinking too much costs time we will not have." "How close are they?" "Closer than you might expect," he said. "Fear is a good teacher, when it is channeled correctly. Every one of these pilots understands exactly what is riding on this plan. That kind of understanding tends to focus a person's attention." I watched the simulation for a while longer, seeing young faces behind the pod glass, concentrating hard on formations that would one day matter in ways these pilots could not yet fully imagine. Some of them had lost family members in earlier stages of the war. Some of them had volunteered specifically because they wanted a chance to be part of something that might finally turn the tide, rather than simply defend against another loss. I did not know all of their names yet, but I intended to learn as many as I could before this was over, because I believed a commander owed that much to the people trusting her with their lives. Engineering presented its own set of challenges, ones that tested my patience in different ways. A propulsion specialist named Claire Sutton led the team responsible for developing the stealth systems that would allow our entire fleet to remain hidden from Concordat sensors until the exact moment we chose to reveal ourselves. She met me in a cramped engineering bay aboard the halyard, surrounded by diagnostic readouts and half-assembled components that looked, to my untrained eye, like a puzzle missing most of its pieces. "The theory works," she told me, wiping grease from her hands onto a cloth that had clearly seen better days. "We have tested it in isolated conditions dozens of times. The problem is scale. Hiding one ship from standard sensors is difficult but achievable. Hiding an entire fleet, moving in coordinated formation, without a single detectable signature leaking through, that is a different kind of problem entirely." "Can it be solved?" "It has to be," she said simply, "so we will solve it." I appreciated that answer more than she probably realized, because it echoed something I had come to believe deeply over the previous months. This entire plan rested on people who refused to accept failure as an option, who treated every obstacle as a problem to be solved, rather than a reason to abandon the larger goal. I had seen armies built on obedience before. This felt different. This felt like something closer to shared purpose, and I found myself trusting that difference more than I trusted almost anything else about our chances. The months passed in a rhythm of small victories and small setbacks, each one carefully tracked, each one weighed against the ticking clock of Concordat confidence that Margaret Doyle's intelligence reports monitored from a distance. Every few weeks, a new report would arrive, detailing enemy fleet movements, colony attacks, propaganda broadcasts, celebrating the supposed destruction of Earth's defenses. Each report confirmed the same painful truth. The lie was holding, but real people continued paying its price on the front lines, colonies falling to an enemy who believed there was nothing left to stop them. I remember one evening in particular, sitting alone in my quarters after receiving news that a small human settlement on the edge of Concordat-controlled space had been evacuated just hours before an enemy strike destroyed it completely. No lives had been lost in that particular attack, but the settlement itself, homes and buildings and years of quiet human life, was gone. Another piece of evidence added to the growing case that Earth's remaining strength was nothing more than scattered refugees with no ability to fight back. Daniel found me there later that night, standing at the small viewport in my quarters, watching the distant light of the gas giant our shipyard hid behind. "You should rest," he said. "The final systems checks begin in 6 hours." "I keep thinking about how many people have paid for this plan already," I said. 11 crews at Kepler's Vale, settlements evacuated just ahead of destruction, over and over, while we build something that has not fired a single shot yet. "They are not paying for nothing," he said. "Every colony that gets evacuated in time is a colony that survives to be rebuilt later. Every month this fleet grows in secret is a month closer to ending this war for good, instead of losing it slowly, one battle at a time, the way we would if we tried to fight them honestly right now." "I know that," I said. "Knowing it and feeling it are different things." He did not argue with that, because he understood it as well as I did. We stood together at the viewport for a while, saying nothing further, and I found a strange kind of comfort in that silence, the same way I had found comfort in Peter Hale's final words months earlier. Sometimes the people who understand a burden best are not the ones who try to talk you out of feeling it. They are the ones willing to simply stand beside you while you carry it. By the 5th month, the Second Fleet had grown into something that exceeded even my earliest expectations. 218 ships, ranging from small strike craft to massive capital vessels larger than anything humanity had fielded before the war began, all of them equipped with Claire Sutton's stealth systems, all of them crewed by volunteers, trained under Nathan Price's demanding simulation programs, all of them waiting in silence behind the cover of a dead gas giant that no Concordat scout had ever thought worth investigating. Margaret Doyle arrived aboard the halyard for a final review roughly 2 weeks before the operation that would eventually lead to the broadcast I watched with such careful stillness on my bridge. She walked the length of the primary hangar bay with me, watching pilots run final checks on strike craft, watching engineers make last adjustments to systems that had taken months to perfect. "Intelligence suggests the Concordat is planning some kind of public celebration," she told me as we walked. "A unity ceremony, broadcast across every world in their territory, and, deliberately, across every human channel they can reach. They want to make their victory as visible and as humiliating as possible." "When?" "Soon," she said. "Weeks, not months. Their confidence has reached a peak. Every report we intercept describes Earth as finished. Our fleet is destroyed. Our remaining people as nothing more than scattered survivors waiting to be found." I felt something settle inside me as she said that, a strange calm that came from finally seeing the end point of months of waiting arrive on the horizon. "Then we let them have their ceremony," I said. "We let them stand in front of every camera they can find and declare victory. And when they finish speaking, we answer them." Margaret studied me for a long moment, the same careful, precise expression she had worn the day she first briefed me on this entire plan, back when it existed only as numbers on a datapad, and a promise that patience would eventually pay for itself. "Command has approved you for final operational authority," she said. "When the moment comes, the decision to reveal the fleet belongs entirely to you. No delays for further authorization. No second guessing from anyone above your command. You have earned that authority, and more importantly, you understand this operation better than anyone else alive." I accepted that responsibility, the way I had accepted every other part of this plan, with a mixture of determination and quiet fear that I had learned, over the previous months, not to let show on my face in front of my crew. 2 weeks later, I sat in my command chair aboard the Prodigal Son, watching 5 alien captains raise their cups in celebration of a victory they believed was already secured, and I understood, with total certainty, that everything the Second Fleet had trained for, built for, and waited for across 5 silent months was about to begin. The countdown that mattered had already started the moment their broadcast ended. 6 hours until their unity ceremony. 6 hours until 218 hidden ships moved from silence into position. 6 hours until a lie that had cost 11 ships and countless sleepless nights finally paid its full and complete price. The final hour passed slower than any of the 5 months that came before it. I stood on the bridge of the Prodigal Son, watching the countdown clock in the corner of the main display tick toward 0, and I found myself thinking, strangely, about small things. The sound of Grace Whitfield's fingers moving across her console, the particular quiet way Daniel Ford breathed when he was concentrating hard on something, the faint hum of the ship's systems beneath my feet, steady and familiar, the same hum I had heard through every stage of this entire plan. "Ceremony broadcast beginning in 10 minutes, Grace announced, her voice carefully even, despite the tension I could see in the set of her shoulders. All 5 Concordat captains confirmed present at the gathering point. Full fleet assembly, exactly as intelligence predicted. "Formation status," I said. Daniel checked the readout. "All 218 ships holding stealth positions. Every commander has confirmed readiness. We are simply waiting on your order." I nodded and turned my attention back to the main display, where a live feed from a small disguised probe showed the 5 Concordat warships gathering above the same shipping lane where their earlier broadcast had been recorded. Crews moved visibly on external platforms, preparing for what was clearly meant to be a grand and theatrical event. Banners bearing Concordat symbols stretched between 2 of the larger vessels. Camera drones hovered in careful formation, capturing angles designed to make the gathering look as impressive as possible to every viewer across 2 civilizations. "They really believe this is over," Grace said quietly, almost to herself. "They have no reason to believe otherwise," I said. "That belief is the only weapon we needed them to carry into this moment." The ceremony began exactly on schedule. Vorak appeared first on the broadcast feed, standing on an external platform of his flagship, 4 eyes catching artificial light, rigged specifically for this moment. Behind him, the other 4 captains arranged themselves in careful positions, each one representing a different vessel, each one about to claim credit for a victory that had never actually happened the way they believed it had. "People of the Concordat," Vorak began, his translated voice carrying a formal weight it had lacked during the earlier, more casual broadcast. "6 hours ago, we declared the destruction of Earth's defense fleet to every world under our unity. Today, we gather to make that declaration permanent, official, and undeniable. Let this moment be recorded across every archive in Concordat space. Earth has fallen." I watched his face on the display, calm and confident, utterly certain of the story he was telling. Beside him, Captain Dessa raised both arms, in a gesture our translators identified as ceremonial triumph, while Captain Tellin, young and eager, stood slightly forward of the others, clearly hoping the cameras would favor him during this historic moment. 2 minutes, Grace said. I stood from my command chair, walking slowly toward the center of the bridge, feeling every eye on my crew shift toward me, even as they kept their hands steady on their stations. This was the moment 5 months of secret construction, of hidden training, of a battle fought and lost on purpose, had all been building toward. "Fleet-wide channel," I said. "All ships, prepare to drop stealth on my mark." "Channel open," Daniel confirmed. I thought briefly of Peter Hale, of 11 ships that had burned to make this exact moment possible, of a young captain's final words carried across static months earlier. "Tell them it worked." "1 minute," Grace said. On the display, Vorak continued speaking, gesturing toward the stars behind him, as though claiming ownership of the entire system. "Let this broadcast reach every human ear, still listening somewhere in the dark," he said. "There is no fleet coming, there is no hope coming, there is only surrender, or there is nothing at all." 30 seconds, Grace said. I raised my hand, feeling the weight of every decision that had led to this exact instant settle into something calm and clear inside my chest. Around me, my crew waited, hands hovering over controls, ready to translate a single gesture into an action that would echo across 2 civilizations for years to come. 10 seconds, Grace whispered. I watched the counter tick down on the main display, each number arriving with a strange, stretched sense of weight. 5, 4, 3. "Drop stealth," I said. "Now." The order left the bridge and traveled outward across a network of hidden relays to 218 ships that had waited in silence for 5 months, and space itself seemed to change in response. On the probe feed still broadcasting Vorak's ceremony, I watched the moment unfold in real time. Behind the 5 Concordat ships, space tore open in a ring formation that stretched wider than any single vessel could span, human warships appearing not as scattered contacts, but as an entire coordinated fleet, arranged with precision that made clear this was no accident, no random encounter, but a deliberate and total reveal. Vorak's speech died mid-sentence. I watched his 4 eyes widen, watched his hand freeze in the middle of a gesture that had, moments earlier, been claiming ownership of the entire system. Behind him, Captain Dessa's raised arms dropped slowly to her sides. Captain Tellon, still standing eagerly forward of the others, turned fully around, staring at the formation now surrounding their entire ceremonial gathering. "All ships confirm position," Daniel reported, his voice tight with focus. "Full ring formation established around the Concordat gathering, no gaps in coverage. They have nowhere to retreat without passing directly through our lines." On the display, I watched chaos take hold of the ceremony that had, seconds earlier, been a carefully staged declaration of victory. Crew members on external platforms scrambled toward interior access points. Camera drones, which had been capturing footage meant to celebrate Earth's destruction, now captured something entirely different, something the Concordat's propaganda teams had never planned to broadcast. Vorak's voice returned to the feed, no longer confident, no longer measured, cracking slightly around the edges of words that clearly had not been prepared for this possibility. "Impossible," he said. "Our intelligence confirmed. Your fleet was destroyed. We watched it happen." "You watched what we wanted you to watch," I said, opening a direct channel to his ship, my voice carrying across the same broadcast that had, minutes earlier, been declaring humanity finished. "Kepler's veil was never a defeat, Captain Vorak. It was an invitation, and you accepted it completely." I watched his face on the display shift through several expressions in rapid succession, confusion giving way to something closer to dawning understanding, and finally settling into an expression I recognized easily, because I had felt something similar myself during the darkest months of this entire plan. Fear, arriving late, but arriving completely. Behind him, Captain Horan, the oldest of the 5, stepped forward, his voice steadier than the others but carrying an edge that had not been present during the earlier broadcast. "This changes nothing," he said. "Our forces remain superior. 5 ships against your formation still favors experience and firepower." "Then look more closely at what surrounds you," I said, "before you decide what still favors you." I gestured to Grace, who adjusted the feed to show a wider view of the formation, letting the full scale of 218 ships become visible in a single frame. Capital vessels larger than anything the Concordat had encountered from Earth before, strike craft arranged in precise defensive layers, Support ships holding position with the kind of discipline that only months of careful training could produce. Captain Horan's steady voice faltered slightly as the full picture became clear to him, and I watched something shift in his posture, the confident stance of a conqueror giving way, slowly, to the more careful posture of someone recalculating every assumption he had walked into this ceremony believing. "You built this," he said, "while we celebrated your destruction." "We built this because you celebrated our destruction," I said. "Every broadcast you sent across your propaganda channels, every colony you claimed as proof of Earth's collapse, every moment you spent certain there was nothing left to watch for, all of it bought us the exact time we needed." Captain Dessa, silent until now, finally spoke, her clicking voice carrying less amusement than it had during the earlier broadcast, and more of something that sounded, even through translation, like genuine alarm. "What do you intend to do with us?" I let the question hang in the air for a moment, watching all 5 captains through their respective feeds, watching the ceremony that had been designed to humiliate humanity across 2 entire civilizations transform, in the span of a few short minutes, into something else entirely. A moment that would be remembered, and rebroadcast, and studied by every world watching, for reasons none of them had planned for when they scheduled this celebration. "That depends," I said, "on what you do next." The 5 captains exchanged glances across their separate feeds, none of them speaking immediately, each one clearly recalculating a situation that had, minutes earlier, seemed completely secure. Around their formation, 218 human ships held position in perfect silence, waiting, the same way they had waited for 5 long months, for whatever came next. Silence settled across the broadcast for a long moment. 5 alien captains and 1 human commander, each one aware that whatever happened next would be remembered far beyond this single encounter. I stood at the center of my bridge, watching their faces on 5 separate feeds, and I thought about every choice that had brought this moment into being. 11 ships lost at Kepler's Veil. 5 months of secret construction behind a dead gas giant. Colonies evacuated just ahead of destruction, their people carrying nothing but the knowledge that survival mattered more than pride. A young captain's final words, carried across static, asking only that someone remember his sacrifice had meant something. "You have a choice in front of you," I said finally, addressing all 5 captains at once. "I am not interested in destroying 5 ships for the sake of proving a point. I am interested in ending a war that has cost both our peoples far more than either side intended when it began." Captain Vorak's 4 eyes narrowed slightly, suspicion clear even through the awkward gap of translation. "You could destroy us where we stand," he said. "Your formation surrounds us completely. Why offer terms instead?" "Because a demonstration only matters if the right people survive to carry its message home," I said. "If I destroy 5 ships today, the Concordat replaces them within months, and continues believing Earth is an enemy to be crushed, rather than a civilization to be reckoned with honestly. If I let you return home, carrying the truth of what happened here, that message travels further than any weapon I could use against you." Captain Horan studied me for a long moment through his feed, his expression unreadable in the way that species with unfamiliar features often were to human observers, but something in his posture had shifted since the initial shock of our arrival, settling into something closer to careful calculation. "What terms," he asked, "are you proposing?" "Full withdrawal from every human colony, currently under Concordat control," I said, "beginning with Meridian, Halcyon, and New Arden. A formal acknowledgement, broadcast across the same channels you used to declare our destruction, that Earth's fleet remains intact, and that this war, as you have fought it, is finished." Captain Tellon, younger and clearly less prepared for negotiation than the others, spoke up sharply. "You ask us to admit defeat publicly? To reverse everything we declared only hours ago?" "I ask you to tell the truth," I said. "Which is more than your ceremony offered anyone watching today." A tense silence followed, broken eventually by Captain Dessa, whose clicking voice had lost every trace of the amusement it carried during the earlier broadcast. "And if we refuse these terms?" I gestured slightly, and Daniel adjusted the feed once more, widening the view to show, in clear and undeniable detail, the full extent of the formation surrounding their 5 ships. Every angle of retreat closed, every weapon system aligned. A fleet built across 5 months of sacrifice, ready, patient, and utterly capable of ending this confrontation in whatever manner became necessary. Then we discover together exactly how permanent your earlier declaration of Earth's destruction turns out to be, I said. I would prefer we did not need to find out. The 5 captains fell into a hushed conversation among themselves, their audio muted from my feed, but their body language communicating enough for me to understand the shape of their debate. Captain Horan spoke the longest, gesturing occasionally toward the surrounding formation still visible on their own displays. Captain Vorek listened more than he spoke, his earlier confidence entirely gone now, replaced by the careful posture of someone recalculating every decision that had led his fleet into this exact position. When the muted conversation ended, it was Captain Horan who spoke first, his voice carrying the weight of someone who understood, perhaps more clearly than the others, exactly how thoroughly the situation had reversed itself. "We accept your terms," he said. "Full withdrawal from the colonies named. Public acknowledgement of today's events, broadcast across every channel we use to declare victory." I felt something ease in my chest, though I kept my expression carefully neutral, aware that 5 months of tension did not simply disappear because an agreement had been reached. There would be details to finalize, verification systems to establish, careful monitoring to ensure the withdrawal happened exactly as promised. But the foundation of it, the moment that mattered most, had just been secured. "Then we have an understanding," I said. "Your ships will be permitted to depart this system once withdrawal orders have been confirmed and broadcast. Any deviation from these terms will be treated as a resumption of hostilities, and I do not believe either of us wants to discover what that would mean, given the formation currently surrounding you." Captain Vorek spoke once more before the channel closed, his voice quieter than it had been at any point during the entire encounter. "How long," he asked, "did you plan this?" "Longer than you spent celebrating our destruction," I said, "and with considerably more patience than your victory speech suggested you believed we possessed." The broadcast ended shortly afterward, the 5 Concordat ships beginning the slow process of preparing for withdrawal, under the watchful presence of a fleet that showed no sign of relaxing its formation until every term of the agreement had been fully honored. I remained on the bridge for hours afterward, monitoring the process personally, unwilling to let a single detail slip through unnoticed after everything it had cost to arrive at this moment. Grace Whitfield approached me quietly during a lull in the monitoring, her earlier tension replaced by something that looked, for the first time in months, like genuine relief. "The broadcast reached every human colony still listening," she said, "and every Concordat world watching their official channels. Both sides saw exactly what happened here today." "How are people reacting?" I asked. "Command is already receiving reports," she said. "Colonies that had given up hope are celebrating. Other governments across this sector, ones who had remained neutral throughout the war, are reaching out through diplomatic channels, wanting to understand exactly what Earth is now capable of." I thought about that for a long moment, watching the last of the Concordat ships prepare for their departure on the main display. This war had never truly been about a single battle, or even a single deception, no matter how large the scale of what we had accomplished today. It had always been about survival, about proving that a civilization dismissed as weak, as finished, as unworthy of serious consideration, could reshape the terms of an entire conflict through patience, sacrifice, and a willingness to let an enemy's arrogance become their greatest weakness. Daniel joined me at the viewport, as the Concordat fleet finally began its slow withdrawal from the system, 5 ships that had arrived to celebrate humanity's destruction, now departing under terms that acknowledged, publicly and permanently, exactly how wrong that celebration had been. "Command wants to know how you would like to proceed," he said. "There is talk of expanding the Second Fleet's operations, using today's success to pursue additional withdrawals across other contested systems." "There will be time for that conversation," I said. "Today, I want confirmation that every evacuated colony receives word their homes are being returned to them. I want the names of everyone lost at Kepler's Vale, formally recorded and honored, not buried in a classified file that no one outside High Command ever sees." "That will happen," Daniel said. "I will make certain of it personally." I watched the last Concordat ship vanish into a jump point, carrying with it a message that would reach every corner of their civilization within days. A message that reversed months of confident propaganda in a single afternoon. Somewhere across the galaxy, other powers who had watched this war unfold from a careful distance were already reconsidering what they thought they understood about Earth's capabilities, about human patience, about the particular danger of underestimating a civilization that had chosen, deliberately, to let its enemies believe a lie, long enough for that lie to become their undoing. I thought again of Peter Hale, of his final transmission carried across static months earlier, asking only that someone remember his sacrifice had meant something in the end. It had. All of it had. Standing at the viewport of the prodigal son, watching the last traces of a defeated enemy fleet disappear into the dark, I understood that this moment would be remembered far beyond the borders of this single system, far beyond the immediate relief of colonies being returned to their rightful people. It would be remembered as the moment a galaxy learned an important lesson about Earth, one that no propaganda broadcast could ever fully undo again. Humanity had not been defeated at Kepler's Veil. It had simply been waiting, patient and quiet, for exactly the right moment to answer. And when that moment finally arrived, it had answered completely.